Hi everyone, I'm Jessica Beck. I'm the Milton Fine Curator of Art at the Andy Warhol Museum, and I'm here on one of the final book videos. And today, instead of talking directly about Andy Warhol's books, because we've covered a lot of them over this series, I'm going to talk about some books about Andy Warhol that I've read in my studies on Warhol and that have been really foundational texts for me, and that I sort of see as a really great bibliography for thinking about Warhol's practice, and I wanted to share that with you. So I'm going to start with a copy of the Andy Warhol Catalog Raisonné. So these are quite large. You can see it's really dense. It comes in this really interesting box that feels a lot like Warhol's 1960s work, his Berlot boxes, which were hand stenciled. But there are actually 5 volumes of this book, and this particular volume, the first one, is just work from 1961 to 1963. This project is organized by the Andy Warhol Foundation, and Neil Prince and Sally King Nero have worked on these books for their careers. And it really is a life's work to catalog Andy Warhol's work. And they currently have 5 volumes published, so it's up to 1978. There's still a lot of work to be done. So if you're looking for a definitive text on Warhol's practice, it would be these copies of the Catalog Raisonné. Now, they're quite expensive, so they're hard to own, but libraries often have copies of them. So once libraries open again, I encourage you to use those books as a good resource for Andy Warhol's work. Another really fun book, and I'm missing the original CD, is the original catalog of the Andy Warhol Museum, which was published in 1994 for the inauguration of the museum. And in an interesting way, I didn't think about this until just now, but the copy of this book with the CD might actually mirror Warhol's index, which came with a CD component as well and had kind of pop-out elements to it. I don't have a copy of index at home with me, but this book has essays by some of these really foundational people. Callie Angel, who worked at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, who started the Warhol Catalog Raisonné, a film. Mark Francis was the first curator at the Andy Warhol Museum, and there's some really sort of foundational thinking about Warhol's practice and the collection and the things that the collection hold, the jewels of the Warhol collection in Pittsburgh. So that's a really great one. If you can get your hands on this, this is a limited edition, and I have an old used copy that is missing again. It's CD. And so the biography that I really do love is this one by Wayne Kallstrom. It's quite small, it's pocket size, and instead of having this kind of necessity for completeness or finding every sort of tidbit about Andy Warhol's life, it's divided up into these poetic themes. And so he has this first section on the 50s, his growing up in Pittsburgh, under this before chapter broken down into traumas and pussy heaven, which refers to that book 25 Cats Named Sam and One Blue Pussy, and also these coded queer circles that Warhol was moving in the 1950s in New York. He has the 1960s, which is broken down into screens, torture, rupture, and after, which is shadows and endangered species. So it's this really poetic look at Warhol's life and practice, and a real focus too on Warhol's sexuality and sex in Warhol's work, which I think is really important because there is this continued myth that he was asexual, and that you can't look at these ideas of desire in Warhol's practice, but it's very prevalent in the work. So he ends with this really fascinating quote. In a time of artistic meanness, when creators stint posterity by refusing to produce, and by masquerading their drought as good manners, Warhol threw away decorum and worked. He was one of the most magnanimous producers of the 20th century, putting art forward again and again, working to salvage work, his favorite category, and to teach us in a deathless, didactic act that incarnation is hard labor, with no time left for love. So there's Wayne Kallstrom. If you're looking for an Andy Warhol reader of early scholarship from the 90s on Warhol's practice, this October book, and October is an art historical journal, is a really great way to sort of dive into early scholarship on Andy Warhol. And so there are some really great texts in here, really important texts. Thomas Crowe's Saturday Disasters, Hal Foster's Death in America, Rosalind Krause's Carnal Knowledge. These are really kind of foundational texts that came out of the 1990s and thinking about Warhol's practice in really scholarly ways. And so we have to remember that Warhol died in 87, so the scholarship takes about that amount of time, almost 10 years, to catch up to how we really think about the practice. So another book, and I only have the French copy at home, which is kind of funny, but a friend gifted this to me, and it's this book about Warhol and interviews. And I think it's a really important book to think about this fabrication of Warhol's persona that he starts to really coalesce in the 1960s. And so you can actually see it starting to shift in the interviews, how he approaches the interview. So reading up on Warhol's interviews, especially from this early period, is a really kind of fascinating lens to uncovering how he really crafted this persona. A really fun book that I am obsessed with is Andy Warhol, the series by Hilton Als, and this is the first one about Warhol and Shirley Temple. These early fantasies that Warhol had with stardom, but also this kind of queer fantasy of inhabiting a feminine icon and of feminine celebrity, and a young celebrity that was also Warhol's age. So it's a really fascinating fictional story, but based in actually a lot of research. And Hilton, I believe, is creating a whole series, and he's working on other women in Warhol's life and pairing Warhol and these women together. So I love this one. Hilton is amazing. So another person that is really great, younger scholar, Anthony Gruden, and this book, Warhol's Working Class, I think is really important because many scholars have overlooked this class story with Andy Warhol, and it's actually foundational to his story. And so much of Warhol's practice, especially in that 60s period, is about class in America and this dream, the American dream of ascending class. And so Warhol was fascinated by wealth and money and celebrity and these inner elite circles of New York, and so much of the art world is run on capital and exists in this elite class status. So thinking about Warhol and these concepts is really important. So this book, Douglas Crimp's Our Kind of Movie, which was published in 2011, I believe, is just so important to me personally, and Douglas died in 2019, but his work on Warhol's the queer scholarship of Warhol's practice is extremely foundational and very important to the narrative. And one of his early texts in here about Warhol's 1963 film Blowjob really transformed my thinking about Warhol's films and this idea of projection and desire and judgment and queerness, and this way in which we approach Warhol's work, and how art history and this lens has to expand and really necessitates this reading of queerness and sexuality in Warhol's practice. And Douglas actually came to the museum in 2016 when I did an exhibition called Andy Warhol, My Perfect Body. I did this small catalog for that show, but he and I did an interview that's published in here, and he came and read his memoir before pictures, and we did a really lovely program at the museum. And then finally, I'll just nod again, Donna DeSalvo's really beautiful catalog, From A to B and Beck again, the Whitney retrospective. So if you're looking for new scholarship, I've highlighted a lot of books from the 90s. This is really the one right now. So Glenn Ligon, the African-American painter and artist, is published in here. There are younger scholars published in here, and there is really great new thinking about Andy Warhol's work. So those are the books I would suggest. So many of you have left us a lot of comments, so let us know what you're thinking and what content you would like to hear more of, because it's been fun to share this material with you, material that we don't always think of with Andy Warhol, of reading about him and reading about his work. So I hope all of you are well and safe, and I'll see all of you again soon. Thanks for watching.